Up next in the broadcast, Israel and Palestinians agree to a 72-hour ceasefire, which was proposed by Egypt, but eyes are on whether this one will hold, unlike the many others before it. With the death toll nearing 900 in the latest West African Ebola outbreak, the World Bank pledges $200 million to fight the virus. Meanwhile, an experimental cure shows signs of hope. And we talk with a North Korea expert to get a pulse of the current state of inter-Korean relations and whether we should expect any more provocations from Pyongyang this year. Primetime News begins now.
Hi everyone, welcome to Primetime News on this Tuesday. I'm Kang Chiri.
And I'm Sean Lim. We're coming to you live from Seoul. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Well, Korea's army and police chiefs both stepped down on Tuesday to take responsibility for their failures to deal with a series of catastrophes that have rocked the nation over the past few months.
The Army Chief of Staff, General Kwon Ho-sung, offered to resign over the death of a 23-year-old conscript who was bullied to death. And the National Police Commissioner Lee Sung-han also resigned for his agency's delay in identifying the body of Yoo Byung-an, the fugitive owner of the Sewol-ho ferry operator. And staying with the case of a young soldier who was bullied to death, the Korean government plans to expand this investigation into the killing of this army conscript who died after being struck in the chest by his senior soldiers. Yoo-rian has more.
Speaking about the 23-year-old young soldier who was bullied to death back in April, President Park Geun-hye vowed a thorough investigation and punishment for those found responsible. The comments came during a cabinet meeting Tuesday morning, a day after Defense Minister Han Min-gu apologized to the nation over the failure to prevent such an incident from occurring.
It's a military commander's basic responsibility to send enlisted men back to their parents safe and sound. We feel a great burden over this incident.
The 23-year-old Yoon was bullied severely by his comrades back in April when he was forced to hold a horse-riding stance until the early hours of the morning and told to lick spit off the ground. He choked to death after being hit in the chest by 5 of his comrades. The army announced it will consider pressing murder charges against the 5 soldiers if found responsible for the young soldier's death. It's the latest in a series of similar incidents in recent months, and public distrust in the military is growing. An army sergeant who had been bullied by his comrades went on a shooting rampage back in June, killing 5.
When my son goes to the army, I'm going to check his body whenever I visit to see if he has been physically abused. I'm worried he may have to go through the same thing and be forced to hide it.
Harsh military practices and a distorted rank-based culture which seniors can use to abuse junior enlisted soldiers has long been prevalent in the military. To maintain a strong defense against North Korea, all South Korean men are mandated to serve in the military. But the recurrence of abuse-led deaths has the nation deeply worried about the safety of their sons. Yoo-rian, Arirang News.
The Ebola virus is rapidly spreading in West Africa. Cases detected in the region since earlier this year have topped 1,600, with the death toll nearing 900. And now the World Bank is stepping in to help curb the deadly outbreak with a pledge of $200 million. Our Kim Min-ji has more.
The World Bank has pledged a $200 million emergency fund to help contain the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. World Bank President Jim Yong Kim said the fund would provide support to stop further transmission of Ebola within the 3 affected nations and prevent infections in neighboring countries. The emergency fund will be used to pay for medical supplies and salaries for medical staff and also help communities cope with financial hardships caused by the epidemic. Others are also reaching out. The African Development Bank has set aside $60 million for support and the World Health Organization $100 million. The Ebola outbreak has claimed at least 887 lives since the first case in Guinea in February, and Nigeria has now reported its second case of the disease. However, raising hopes that there may be a cure, 2 American missionary workers infected with the virus are reportedly recovering after receiving an experimental drug called ZMapp. Health officials say Dr. Ken Brantley and Nancy Wright-Bull began showing signs of improvement within a couple of hours. Although the serum hasn't been tested in humans before, monkeys have survived the virus when given the serum within 48 hours of infection. Meanwhile, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said it will dispatch 50 staff to the affected regions within this month to fight the deadly virus. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Korean Foreign Ministry says the government will provide an additional $500,000 in assistance to West African countries to help them contain the Ebola outbreak.
That's right. This is in addition to the $100,000 it provided earlier in the year in response to an international call for emergency funds made by the World Health Organization. North Korea has recently stepped up with its harsh rhetoric against South Korea and the United States and with its missile firings. And to talk more about this, Joel Wit, a former State Department official and the editor of the 38 North website of Johns Hopkins University, is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Mr. Wit, good morning, and thank you so much for making time for us today. Now, recent missile firings and threats to attack the presidential offices of South Korea and the U.S. from North Korea, what does it want?
Well, that's, of course, always a good question. I think you need to take a step back and look at a number of different developments. There's, first of all, those North Korean threats. Secondly, there is what appears to be a deterioration in North-South relations. Third, you have the upcoming U.S.-South Korean exercises. And fourth, you have the Asian Games coming up as well. So all of these factors are in the mix, and the danger is the situation will deteriorate before the Games and result in some sort of provocation.
So your analysis has pointed to the North being capable of another nuclear test in a few months, but do you think it'll really go for it, especially given China's stern stance on the issue?
Well, I can't predict whether they're going to test or not. All I can do is talk about what we see through the commercial satellite photos. Mm-hmm. And so the most recent photos of the nuclear test site show it's very quiet. I don't know exactly what that means. It may mean that they've made all their preparations and all they need is an order from Pyongyang, or it may mean that they really aren't planning on conducting a test. But it's important to note that once a decision is made, they could probably conduct a test within a month or so of that decision.
Well, what are you hearing in D.C. about the U.S. perception of South Korea-China ties getting a boost, especially given their summit earlier this year and their shared frustration with Japan? Do you think that that can affect North Korea's future behavior?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think, if you're asking about the reaction in Washington to the recent summit, I don't think people are particularly distressed by the meeting between the two leaders. A lot of what came out of that is predictable, and I would note that contrary to some press reports, it's very clear that the Chinese are still steering a middle course in dealing with North Korea, and they're not particularly supportive of either the United States or South Korea's stance towards North Korea. So I don't see any big changes coming out of that summit.
You said in a recent interview that the Obama administration's strategic patience with North Korea has sort of failed and that it needs to pursue a high-ranking channel with North Korea for dialogue. But wouldn't that make all these efforts and time wasted to persuade North Korea to give up its nuclear program all this time go to waste?
Well, I would make 2 points. The first point is that we no longer have a policy of strategic patience. According to Ambassador Davies, who is in charge of U.S. policy, it's a policy of strategic impatience. So I just want to say that for the record here so all your listeners understand.
Okay.
Second point is that, I find it somewhat humorous. It's like we have a policy based on slogans without results. And you're absolutely right. For the past 5 years, we've really achieved nothing in dealing with North Korea. And it's not just the fault of the United States or South Korea. North Korea is difficult to deal with. So the policy has failed, and really nothing has been achieved, and what we need now is a new policy.
And which means we need to, the Washington needs to engage with Pyongyang. Is that what it is?
Well, I always hesitate to label a new policy engagement because a new policy has to include diplomacy, such as engagement, but it also should include measures such as sanctions or even military steps to protect ourselves, because this is a very dangerous situation. So we need to use all of the above in dealing with North Korea, and we're not doing that.
All right. And really quickly, what do you suggest that the Park Geun-hye administration and South Korea do to break away from this long stall with North Korea?
Well, if I was king for a day, I would suggest that the South Korean government becomes much more active in trying to rebuild relations with North Korea. And you can start small, but I think the government needs to become much more serious about that effort.
All right, Mr. Wit, thank you so much for your time tonight and for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
Another monument dedicated to women forced into sexual slavery in the early 20th century has been unveiled in New Jersey this time. 2 Korean former sex slaves in the United States were also part of this special event. Kwon So-ah tells us more.
This iron butterfly has been established to remember the hundreds of thousands of women who were forced into sexual slavery before and during the Second World War by the Japanese military. Honoring the so-called comfort women from Korea, China, Taiwan, the Philippines, the Netherlands, and Indonesia, the monument was unveiled at Liberty Plaza in Union City, New Jersey on Monday. It is the 7th such monument in the United States honoring the sexual slavery victims, but this one is a bit different in that it's the first time a local government took the initiative in creating it. Korean communities had taken the lead in other projects throughout the U.S.
This is about human rights, and it's about education. Educating our youth about what took place in the past so we don't make the same mistakes again.
2 surviving Korean comfort women took part in the emotional ceremony that welcomed some 400 people.
We thank the American and Korean people who have come here, and although we don't have much time left, we will live the rest of our lives with strength.
Lee Ok-sun and Kang Il-chul also met with representatives of the White House and State Department during their trip in the U.S., but no details of their talks have been released. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, the California District Court rejected a request from a group of Japanese Americans who want a memorial statue that was put up last year outside of Glendale City Hall removed. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Following last month's by-election defeat, Korea's main opposition party has been left without a leader. And for the time being, the interim leader Park Young-sun is at the helm, and she is promising to break away from the past. Kim Young-gil reports.
Park Young-sun, who is serving as both the full leader of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy and the interim chief of its emergency committee, has been tasked with rebuilding and reforming the party. The committee will carry out a set of reforms until a new leadership is selected early next year.
Our party will select members for the emergency committee from both inside and out of the party. The public can also make recommendations through Twitter, Facebook, or our party's website.
The committee will function as the main opposition's executive branch until a party convention next year, sometime before March. There, officials will pick the party's new chairman, secretary general, and other senior executives. In her new role, Park, a three-term lawmaker, is faced with the arduous task of finding a way to unify different factions within the party and forging a new path.
The future of the New Politics Alliance for Democracy depends on how well we extricate ourselves from old customs and old politics.
The pro-Nomuyon arm once held the lion's share of power, but was weakened following the defeat of former presidential hopeful Moon Jae-in, a key pro-North figure, in the 2012 presidential election. Pundits say that the pro-North faction is now likely to make a comeback. The main opposition party has been in a state of turmoil since its defeat in last week's parliamentary by-elections. The party won just 4 of the 15 parliamentary seats up for grabs, prompting party co-leaders Kim Han-gil and An Chol-soo to step down to take responsibility. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
In less than 10 days, Pope Francis will be in Korea for a 5-day visit that will mark his first trip to Asia, and he'll be running on a very tight schedule. Our Park Ji-won has more.
This will be Pope Francis' first visit to Asia since his inauguration as pontiff in February 2013. Upon his arrival on Thursday, the Pope is set to meet with President Park Geun-hye. As for the rest of his schedule, he will take part in a celebratory mass in Daejeon, where he will meet with around 20 youth representatives from 17 Asian countries. He will also attend the beatification mass of 124 Korean martyrs who lost their lives mostly during the 19th century under severe religious persecution. The mass will be the largest event during the Pope's visit to Korea, held at Gwanghwamun Square in central Seoul, with nearly 1,900 priests and some 200,000 Catholic faithfuls attending. The pontiff will meet with the Asian bishops in Hemi, located in the country's southwest region, followed by a concluding mass for the 6th Asian Youth Day. And Pope Francis is wrapping up his visit with a mass for peace and reconciliation in Seoul, inviting nearly 1,000 people, including former victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement during the early 20th century. The preparatory committee for his visit says he will also meet bereaved families and victims of the April ferry disaster upon the request of the families.
We delivered the message immediately to Rome and received a positive response. We will be inviting families of the victims to a mass held on August 15th.
The Pope is expected to give words of peace and healing not only to the bereaved families, but the entire nation. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The latest humanitarian ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas has gone into effect following intense global pressure to end this conflict.
With more, we now turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, we've seen several of these ceasefires come and go, with both sides accusing the other of breaking them. The question is, will it hold this time around?
Well, many observers are hoping so and going so far as to say that this may be the breakthrough that will lead to longer-term peace. It's just been over 8 hours since the 3-day humanitarian truce, which was proposed by Egypt, started on early Tuesday. And since then, both sides have so far halted all cross-border attacks, with traffic resuming and some businesses opening inside the war-torn territory. Israel's military also announced a full withdrawal of its ground forces from the Gaza Strip. This as an Israeli delegation is set to arrive in Cairo for talks with their Palestinian counterparts. And as you said, with previous truces falling through, often within a matter of hours, there's understandable concern about whether this one will last. More than 1,800 people, overwhelmingly Palestinian civilians, have been killed, and nearly 2 million people displaced since the fighting began 4 weeks ago. Rescue teams in Bangladesh have resumed searching the wreckage of an overcrowded ferry that sank on Monday, with nearly 120 passengers still unaccounted for. Authorities on Tuesday said they had delayed launching a rescue operation due to high waves and strong currents, which forced vessels to turn back from the disaster site. About 100 people have reportedly been rescued, while 4 bodies have been found. An estimated 300 passengers were on board the MV Panak when it capsized in waters 30 kilometers southwest of the capital, Dhaka.
A strong wind hit our ferry, and instantly a huge wave came through the windows and water got into the lower part of the ferry. The passengers became very scared and rushed to the other side of the ferry, and then the ferry tilted and sank.
It's not clear what caused the accident, but local police say the ferry was traveling in rough conditions and carrying more than 3 times its maximum capacity. Boat accidents are unfortunately not uncommon in Bangladesh's river network. In March 2012, a ferry sank near the same spot, killing at least 145 people. And finally, with the hosting of a successful World Cup on their backs, Brazil has begun the countdown to the 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro. John Coates, the vice president of the International Olympic Committee, who as recently as April had described Brazil's Olympic preparations as the worst ever seen, has changed his tone, saying things were now much, much better.
Over the last 2 months, they've really put their foot to the pedal, and the contracts for the Diadora area that had concerned us most have all been let. There is construction happening at a significant pace. And we've got our games director there at the moment watching the test events and for other work. We've got permanent people there, the IOs.
Preparations for the first Olympics on the South American continent have been suffering from numerous delays, rising costs, and poor government communication. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Welcome to sports. Starting off with some rivalry action. Manchester United faced off against Liverpool in the final of the preseason International Championship Cup in Miami on Monday. Liverpool got on the board first with Steven Gerrard drilling a penalty goal 14 minutes in the game, making it 1-0. The first half seemed to go in favor of Liverpool, but in the second half, Wayne Rooney puts in an amazing goal with a volley to tie the game. Just 2 minutes after, Juan Mata beats Liverpool's goalkeeper for a score. Final score of the game, 3-1, with Man U taking home the cup. Now over to baseball. It's time for Tuesday's KBO matchup between the Kia Tigers and the Tucson Bears in Seoul. Starting the pitching game, Yang Hyun-jung with the Kia Tigers and Yoo Hee-kwan for the Tucson Bears. Kia strikes early, scoring the second inning with a single homer by Na Ji-wan. But Tucson answers back in the bottom of the second with 2 singles and a triple, making the score 3-1. Tucson dominates throughout the game for a final score of 8-2. Looking at other games, SK Wyverns beats Nixon Heroes 8-3. Samsung Lions dominates the match, crushing Hana Eagles 14-1. Meanwhile, the NC Dinos and the Lotte Giants game has been suspended in the 5th inning due to problems in the lighting tower. Last on the list, men's swimming. Swimming has gotten a little bit more competitive as Michael Phelps has come out of retirement. Phelps, who has 18 record-setting Olympic gold medals and 22 medals overall, says he was bored just sitting at home. The Olympian retired after the 2012 London Olympics, but started to train seriously last year in preparation for the upcoming 2016 Games in Rio de Janeiro. Currently, the power swimmer is entered in 4 events at the U.S. National Championships, which began on Monday. Well, that wraps it up. This has been Kim Yeon-bin. Stay tuned for more updates from the world of sports.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Now, it's still very hot outside, which means another hot tropical night is in store for us. However, rain is in the forecast for the central region and the southern regions tomorrow, cooling things down a bit. But for the region's forecast to stay dry, such as Daegu, there is heat wave alert in effect for tomorrow, so try to stay indoors if possible to prevent heat stroke. And meanwhile, Typhoon Halong is headed for the south coast of Okinawa, Japan, and will likely track westwards, eventually affecting Jeju Island and the southern regions of Korea by the weekend, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will start off the Wednesday morning at 24 and reach up to 29 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top out at 33 and 30 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 30, while Dokdo and Mangungang both tops to 28. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
And that's Primetime News from our team here at Arirang. I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Kang Tae. Enjoy the rest of your evening and see you soon.